I went back and forth on a headline for today's Morning Pit. I debated back and forth about what to call this episode, and you obviously see the title is "How Did Linebacker Become a Strength for Pitt?" And I thought for a second, I was like, well, should I call it that, or should I call it like, is linebacker a strength for Pitt, or is linebacker Pitt's biggest strength, or something like that, And then I thought, like, you know what? I'm not going to bother with that, because I mean, actually, part of the conversation today will be about linebacker being a strength for Pitt. But I think, for the most part, Pitt fans who've been paying attention over the last couple of years probably already understand it and probably already get it that linebacker is a strength for Pitt. It has become a strength for Pitt in recent years. And it's almost past the point of like debating it. And this isn't about my overhyping of Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields or anything like that. It's even more recent than that. I mean, the last few years, linebacker has become one of Pitt's strongest positions. And it's funny because for the longest time, it really, really wasn't. You know what I mean? We talked about the defensive backs. We knew the corners and the safeties were all really good. And, there was the draft status and NFL success to back that up. We knew the defensive line was really good. There were all Americans up front at D end and D tackle, all conference players, and guys going to the NFL and things like that. And there was all this success that was happening, but in the middle of the defense was this just empty spot, really empty spot of just no production, no draft picks, no all conference selections, no all Americans, nothing like that until the last few years. Those first, let's say 6-7 years of the Narduzzi era, linebacker was not a strength. The last 3 or so, it's moved into that area, and it's just getting better. The arrow's pointing up there on the field and off in terms of recruiting and the, like I say, the on-field play. And linebacker has become one of Pitt's strongest positions, and maybe we'll even make a case today that it is Pitt's number 1 strongest position in the current state. Right now, linebacker might be Pitt's biggest strength, both on the field and in recruiting. So how did it happen? How did Pitt's, fate or fortunes with linebackers turn around in the last few years? What was the big change? What sparked this upward momentum for Pitt's linebackers? Let's talk about the linebackers, how they became a strength, and just where they might stack up on this year's team and in terms of overall position rankings for Pitt right now in 2025. How did the linebackers become the biggest strength on the team? We'll talk about it here on the Morning Pit. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Tuesday edition of the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com. It's a Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network, where we have the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news that you're going to find on the internet. Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfer portal, all that stuff. We cover it all in terms of Pitt sports at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards where you and other Pitt fans can hang out all day, every day, and talk about Pitt sports. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully you can join in the conversation and come hang out with other Pitt fans and talk about everything that's going on. Talk about the games as they're happening. Talk about the the recruiting as it's happening this month with all the official visits and things like that. We got a lot of info that doesn't always make it onto Twitter, doesn't always make it into an article on the front page, but we talk about it on the message boards. And I think if you want to be tuned into everything going on in the world of Pitt sports and Pitt recruiting and everything like that, that's the place to do it. Panther-Lair.com. And we got a special promo running right now, 50% off your subscription. So check it out. It's on the front page at Panther-Lair.com. And then, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You get all of our Pitt video content, these daily Morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday, our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We'll be live tomorrow night, me and Jim Hammett. Actually, Jim's on vacation, so it might be a solo show. Look out. I don't think Jim's going to tune in from the beach, and he shouldn't tune in from the beach. He should enjoy his vacation because we'll put him back to work on the weekend when the next weekend's official visits. So he should enjoy his vacation and not be bothered with the live show. So maybe it'll just be me tomorrow night. Either way, you want to make sure you don't miss any of our video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll be tuned in for all of it all the time. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, linebacker. How did linebacker become one of Pitt's biggest strengths? You know, I made a joke in the 3-2-1 column like 2 weeks ago about how I make a lot of spreadsheets. And I have a spreadsheet that lists, since Narduzzi arrived, every draft pick, All-American, All-Conference selection, or other ACC honors, and any major awards that the players have won. And it breaks it down by position. So I'm looking at it right now, and it lists everybody at each position who's achieved each of those things. And so it's a very kind of visual breakdown of the success Pitt has had or has not had at certain positions. Like, I just now added the first tight end draft pick under Pat Narduzzi, with Gavin Bartholomew getting drafted this past year in the 6th round. That was the first time a tight end has been drafted under Pat Narduzzi. They've had more quarterbacks drafted. They've had more offensive linemen drafted. They've had more, almost every position. We'll say almost just to bury that lead just for a second. Almost every other position, they've had more draft picks than tight ends. And so, when you look at this spreadsheet, it lays the story bare, right? Like, you want to say, like, where have they had the most talent? Where have they had the most NFL players? Where have they had the most all-conference selections and all this? It's all right here, and it lists it out by position. So you can really kind of get a sense of, who's been drafted, who's been getting the All-American honors and all those different things. If I was more inclined, or if I was so inclined, I would I would share the screen here so you could look at it too. But, that's kind of giving away some of the stuff we're going to talk about. Now, naturally, I think some of the positions you would expect have the most names listed. Cornerbacks. They've had 5 cornerbacks drafted under Pat Narduzzi and 4 safeties. So, but that makes sense, right? 9 draft picks in the defensive backfield. That's what you would expect from a Pat Narduzzi defense. The DBs are going to get a lot of draft picks. They've actually had 7 offensive linemen drafted, up to and including Matt Gonsalves, last year, Branson Taylor earlier this spring, Carter Warren the year before. So 3 years in a row, they've had an offensive lineman drafted. I don't think we tend to think of the offensive line as a position of strength, but remember, they're also playing 5 guys at a time. So there's a volume question there, or volume element to consider. That, they've had more offensive linemen drafted, but they've just got more offensive linemen who play. So, similarly, they've had 6 first-team all-conference selections on the offensive line. That's more than any other position. But, pound for pound, or, divided by the number of starters each year, it's not that many. That they've only had 6 drafted over the course, or for 6 first-team all-ACC selections on the offensive line over the course of 10 years. It's not as much, you know what I mean? It's not that much more impressive than having 1 first-team all-conference quarterback over the course of 10 years. You know what I mean? So you take some of that into consideration, but there are definitely positions that stand out. I mean, they've had 5 defensive linemen drafted, with 3 defensive ends, Juan Price, Patrick Jones, and Rashad Weaver, and 2 tackles, Jalen Twyman and Kalijah Cansey. Along with that, they've had 7 first-team all-conference selections on the defensive line. They've had 3 All-Americans on the defensive line. All of this probably tracks with what you would expect. I don't think there are a lot of surprises if you look at a list of draft picks, all-conference selections, and All-Americans over the course of the last 10 years. They more or less line up with the positions where you would expect to see them. Probably the biggest surprise, and I always mention this, and this is just an aside from the conversation we're having here, they've had 9 defensive backs drafted, like Avonte Maddox, Dane Jackson, Jason Pinnock, Damari Mathis, and MJ Devonshire at corner, and then Jordan Whitehead, DeMar Hamlin, Eric Hallett, and Brandon Hill at safety. 9 draft picks. And in 10 years, only 1 all-conference defensive back selection, first-team selection. That was Paris Ford in 2019. They've never had a corner make the first-team all-conference, all-ACC team. That's remarkable to me. They've had 5 draft picks and no first-team all-conference selections. They've had a handful of second-team guys. They had 2 corners on the all-ACC second team, Dane Jackson and MJ Devonshire. They've had 5 safeties, Donovan McMillan most recently. Before that, Eric Hallett, Brandon Hill, DeMar Hamlin, and Jordan Whitehead. Like I say, Paris Ford was a first-team selection. But it's still amazing. And I think there's a lot that we could probably dig into and have a whole other conversation about why there haven't been any corners make the all-conference first team selection over the last 10 years, but it's always an interesting one to me. Otherwise, everything here kind of lines up with what you would expect in terms of draft picks, all ACC and all Americans. One of the biggest holes, now the biggest hole, is at tight end, where they have one draft pick and one second team all ACC selection. Not great, right? I like that's not great, but that again lines up with what you would expect. The other hole, the other position that is sort of woefully underrepresented in draft picks, all conference picks, and all Americans over the last 10 years is linebacker. Pitt has had one linebacker drafted under Pat Narduzzi. One. And it was Servassier Dennis, 5th round pick in the 2023 draft. Prior to this past season, Pitt had one linebacker make the all-conference first team and one linebacker make the all-conference second team over the course of 10 seasons. And it was Servassier Dennis both times. He was the second team pick in 2021. He was the first team pick in 2022. 10 seasons, and only one linebacker made the all-conference first team. One linebacker made the all-conference second team, and that linebacker then went on to be drafted. And it was all the same guy. 10 years. At a position where you play 3 guys and you rotate, you get 4 or 5 guys out there, and they've had one. Linebacker, for the most part, at least the first 7 years or so, was not a strength. And even when they had Servassier Dennis, it was kind of like it was just him. I mean, there were good players. I don't want to say there weren't good players at linebacker. I think Cam Bright was a good player. Phil Campbell was a good player. I think Shane Simon did a decent job. I think Brandon George was solid last year. They've had, even you go back to 2015, Matt Columbus and Mike Caprera had good seasons in 2015. You got into a little bit of a dip there in 16, 17, 18 when you had a lot of, you had Elijah Zeiss and Sean Idowu, nice players, good athletes, but not great. You know what I mean? And certainly overshadowed by the guys playing behind them and the guys playing in front of them. By which I mean the secondary and the secondary and the defensive line, overshadowed by those guys. And so the linebackers, I think, were always viewed as sort of a weakness in Pitt's defense. In a defense that was otherwise very strong, the weakness was the linebackers. Well, starting the last couple of years, that stopped being the case. And certainly last year was a crowning achievement with Kyle Lewis earning All-America honors, becoming the second Pitt linebacker under Pat Narduzzi to earn first-team All-Conference honors, and generally having one of the best seasons by a Pitt linebacker probably in school history. In terms of the stat line that Kyle Lewis put up last year with 100-plus tackles and 15 tackles for loss and a bunch of sacks and 4 interceptions, there are a few guys, maybe nobody in Pitt history has had a stat line at linebacker that compares to what Kyle Lewis did last year. And probably, if you want to look across the board success, you could go back to Scott McKillop, who was, unbelievable in 2008. But one of the guys who really comes closest to Kyle Lewis's stat line last year is another guy who played last year, Rasheem Biles. His stat line, in some ways, is actually even better than Lewis's. He played 1 game fewer than Lewis, so you go on a per-game basis. I think his tackles for loss and sacks are even better than Kyle Lewis. And his overall tackles per game were comparable. And so, and he obviously showed he can be a playmaker. He had the first of the pick sixes in the Syracuse game last season. And I think he looks like he could have a huge year this year. And so what you see, kind of going back to the Servassier Dennis, evolution in those last 2 years of his career, 2021 and 2022. And then certainly since then, you've got this really strong run of play continually improving at the linebacker position. What changed? How did linebacker go from being widely considered the weakness of the defense, the third among, or really fourth among 4 position groups on defense, to being arguably the best, the number 1 position group on the defense and maybe on the whole team, which is I think you can make a pretty good case for right now as they enter the 2025 season. How did it happen? There's probably a lot of factors that you could point to, but I think Ryan Manilak gets a whole lot of credit here. Manilak was hired prior to the 2021 season, and from that point on, he sort of, he was involved in flipping Kyle Lewis from Temple in the fall of 2021. Going into the next year's recruiting class, he was instrumental in landing Jordan Bass and Rasheem Biles and identifying and offering and landing Braylon Lovelace in the 2023 class. The next year, he gets Cam Lindsey and Jeremiah Marcelin to bring in as freshmen last season, 2024, in addition to coaching up and getting Lewis and Biles and Lovelace and all these guys on the field to excel at the levels they did. Now, we'll see about this 2025 class. It came in last year. Justin Thompson from Good Counsel. He had offers from Baylor, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina. Manny Taylor, who was a wide receiver in high school. He's going to play linebacker at Pitt. He had Duke and Virginia Tech. So some solid offer sheets there. We'll see what those guys are able to produce. But when you come into this year, this 2026 recruiting class, and we've talked about this as they've gotten commitments from these guys, this class at linebacker looks absolutely loaded. With 3 commitments after Desmond Johnson committed over the weekend, I think these guys, this is a class that feels like it could rival the Bass Biles Lovelace class in terms of overall talent in recruiting wins. And as a matter of fact, in terms of recruiting wins, this class might be even more impressive than that one. That one, I think, Biles was a nice recruiting win. Lovelace was a good under-the-radar find, and then Bass was one that they had to fight and hold on to all the way through the recruiting process, and credit to Ryan Manilak and the rest of the staff for doing that, and holding on to him. These 3 guys this year, Desmond Johnson, Isaiah Simmons, and Marcus Jennings, might be I don't want to get too crazy of how much we praise these guys, but in terms of recruiting wins, I think it rivals that group. Marcus Jennings from Cass Tech in Detroit, I think is an outstanding recruit. And when he committed, he was one of those first 5 recruits to commit before the official visits. I thought he looked like he might be the best recruit in the class. He picked Pitt over Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, West Virginia. But he's at Cass Tech, has a lot of interest from the Big Ten, has a lot of schools watching him, and I think I thought from the beginning he was going to be one of the toughest guys to hold on to, a little bit like Elijah Dotson last year, who they ultimately ended up losing to Michigan. I thought Jennings might be one of the toughest guys to hold on to, and when you look at his film and look what he did as a junior last year, 111 tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and an interception. That's a ton of production. Then you put together, you add in Isaiah Simmons from Virginia. He had a good offer sheet. He's a top 25 linebacker. He had offers from Virginia, Duke, Georgia Tech, Michigan, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. He had 20 or more tackles for loss last season, 10 sacks, 3-time All-State selection. And this is a guy who's been in high school for 3 years, and he's a 3-time All-State selection, and a defensive leader for a team that is a state championship winning team. I mean, just remarkably productive, remarkably effective, and remarkably good. And I think a really good recruiting win there. Simmons might be the best overall prospect in the class. I think you can make a real case for that and a real, have a conversation about that. And then you throw in Desmond Johnson, who committed over the weekend. He's from Miami Northwestern. Again, 6'1", 195. That's where all these guys are. 6 foot 200, 6'1", 200, 6'1", 195. They're all right around that same size. That Kyle Lewis outside athlete, big safety type of guy. And Johnson last year had 83 tackles, 7 sacks, 3 picks, and 2 forced fumbles. He had offers from Central Florida and Arkansas, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Michigan, Mississippi State, NC State, SMU, Wake Forest. Another really good recruiting win. And I think what you're seeing is Pitt developing a reputation. I'm not going to go so far as to say linebacker you, because that's corny. But you see Pitt developing a reputation, I think, of success with linebackers. I think Kyle Lewis's success, and Rasheem Biles for that matter last year, have played pretty large in getting these guys to take another look at Pitt. I think Ryan Manilak is able to sell on his work with those guys and what they were able to do last year, and I think it's resonating. And they're recruiting as well as they ever have at linebacker. And a position group that looked like it wasn't a strength for the first 5, 7, 8 years of the Narduzzi era is now arguably, like I said, maybe the strongest one on the team. between what they do on the field and what they're expected to do on the field and the recruiting success they're having off the field. It's pretty remarkable. It really is. You don't usually see this kind of turnaround, unless it's a position where like one guy can totally flip it, like a quarterback. You didn't have good quarterbacks for 8 years, and then all of a sudden you get that one big guy, and he comes in, has 2 great years, and now quarterback strength. It's not like that. They've built this thing organically. They've brought in transfers. They brought in Shane Simon. They had Kylan Johnson in 2019. They had Key Thompson in here last year. Tyler Wiltz. They brought in a decent number of transfer linebackers. But the guys who have really made the difference, the guys who have really given Pitt this reputation for strong linebacker play, it's Servassier Dennis, it's Kyle Lewis, it's Rasheem Biles, it's Braylon Lovelace, it's recruits, homegrown recruits. And so the next time somebody tells you that, high school recruiting doesn't matter, it's all just about transfers and this and that. I mean, last year's biggest impact linebacker wasn't a transfer. It was a guy they recruited. And if you look at the linebackers at Pitt who have been all conference selections under Pat Narduzzi, the guys who have been draft picks, All-American, all those, they're all high school recruits. I mean, they're all. I'm talking about Kyle Lewis and Servassier Dennis. But, Rasheem Biles, I think is going to be awesome this year. He was a high school recruit. Braylon Lovelace is going to be really solid. Marcelin and Lindsey are going to be really good. And, again, high school recruits. It still matters if you can do it right. And Pitt, at least with linebackers, has done it right. Now it's, strength of the team. So, how did it become a strength of the team? I think you got to give Ryan Manilak a whole heck of a lot of credit on that one. All right, that's our Tuesday episode here. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And that way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. Make sure you check out the website Panther-Lair.com, Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network. And that might be it. We'll see what kind of recruiting news comes out today. I have a feeling things are going to keep rolling throughout the week with interesting recruiting stuff, particularly as we head into this final official visit weekend. Pitt's recruiting class keeps growing, and I don't see any reason why it would stop. So we'll keep it tuned in at Panther-Lair.com, and you won't miss any of the Pitt recruiting news. All right, make sure you like and subscribe. Hope you had a good start to the week yesterday, and hope you have a great Tuesday today. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.